Hi everyone, welcome. This is Tina Schmidt. Thank you for joining me. I have decided to do a deer in the forest, or actually a fawn in the forest. I splattered with masking fluid and I let it dry. To take it off, you can use your finger or an eraser. I took a lot of it off of the deer where it accidentally got on. And that's okay, and let it thoroughly dry before I take my hockey brush in water to do wet on wet. So I'm wetting the paper. It's a 140-pound watercolor paper, Arches brand, and I'm wetting all around the deer and just a little bit on the portion where he's laying on the grass. I went ahead and wet his body just a tad down there, but the rest of it around his head and neck and back I have not wetted. Now I'm adding Quinacridone Magenta. You can use Quinacridone Rose, or actually any floral color that pleases you. And I'm sort of randomly dolloping it in there and letting it spread. And sometime you can see if I pull it back up off of the deer if it accidentally got on him. You could use also a tiny bit of vermilion here and there to vary the coloration, as I've done. And then I made my own green with Cobalt blue and a little cerulean and the Hansa yellow. So now you see I'm dotting it in there. The background is a little bit lighter in the distance than the foreground. And the masking fluid is working fine, and now I'm taking a fine brush, working it around the deer's head while it's still wet. And you can see that I have splattered that masking fluid and let it dry. I'm wetting it again. Sometimes you can use a paper towel to mask. It's a loose mask, doesn't have to be done with the masking fluid on the whole animal. I just cover it up, and if it needs to be wiped off, I just wipe it off with a damp paper towel. So I'm just taking some of that floral color and splattering it around, and I'm going to do the same with the green. And I can use a little darker green or a little lighter green. Here I'm putting paper towel pieces over the deer where I don't want the splatter to go. And if it gets on them, that's no big deal. I can always use a paper towel dabbed in a little water and wipe it off. So I got a fine brush here. You can see I'm putting in grass stalks and floral stalks with green, a little darker green mixed in there. You can use burnt sienna in your green mix to darken it. And you can use a little blue in the floral with burnt sienna to make the floral stalks along with the magenta. All you want to do for the stalk is just make a little darker color of what you're already using, whether it's the grass stalk or it's the floral stalk. But just to give it a little, I wanted this to be whimsical. It reminds me of Bambi, you know, just sort of that, if you've ever seen Disney's Bambi, how beautiful those watercolor paintings are in there. I wanted this to be whimsical. And while it's still wet, I'm sprinkling salt all over it. Obviously, between the time I painted the stalks and the florals, I had let it dry so that when I painted the grass stalks, it wouldn't spread everywhere. So there's a little downtime there, which of course I zipped through here for time's sake. I didn't show that drying time. Okay, now I'm splattering with some greens, a little bit of yellow, Hansa yellow mixed in there, just to give it a different highlight of a different color of green. And I go back over for the florals again. The effects of salt on the water, it lifts the paint, and then when it dries, it allows the paint to be a little more transparent, and it kind of moves the paint out of the area. So between sprinkling salt and adding some new brush strokes there for the flowers, it's still slightly wet. It's allowing the brush strokes to expand with some of the water that's still on the paper surface. And if you get a cauliflower effect, which is where the paint lifts again, once it's wet and you let it dry and then put another layer on, sometimes you get this spread. They call it a cauliflower effect. That can maybe work to your advantage. I don't have any here in this painting, but it can work to your advantage if you want. In other works where you need more of those textural looks. Okay, what I'm doing now is I was erasing the masking fluid that has dried, and it's left me with these nice little flowers, these little dots that can look like small flowers. And I peeled it all off by rubbing it with the eraser. You could use a kneading eraser or you could use your finger. I'm reluctant to use my finger all the time because of the oils on my hands. So, okay, my first touch of the deer here. A tad of Hansa yellow, a little bit of burnt sienna, and if the burnt sienna is too warm, you can throw in just a slight amount of neutral tint or blue or something to take some of that down. But right now it is burnt sienna glaze with a little bit of that Hansa yellow, not too much yellow. It's just enough. You can also use, if the yellow is too bright, you can use raw sienna or even yellow ochre. Okay, now I'm coming in with burnt sienna, and I'm starting the first layers of the deer. I removed, of course, the torn up paper towel mask, that soft mask. So this is wet on dry. My first layer of the deer has pretty much dried. And now I'm coming over with the next layer. And I'm not so much doing an outline. It looks like I'm sort of, you know, coloring this in as an outline, but really I'm gonna let that spread as soon as I get some of the basic, idea in here. I'll let it bleed and spread a little bit, but it's a little meticulous here. So I'm painting around the fawn spots, and there's no masking on these. This is just painting around, leaving some areas white for the dapples or the spots on the fawn. Now the hind leg is bent, tucked under. So unfortunately, this is not really a time to discuss anatomy, but as if you've ever seen some of my other videos, I go into bone joints and, you know, folds and articulations of the body and the joints and things like that. It's too comprehensive to cover here, but it's enough to say that we are painting and not drawing, but you still should know some of what's going on in that anatomy. Okay, now I'm coming over with the burnt sienna and a little bit of vermilion. I'm using Daniel Smith paints, and you'll see that in the description. Coming in for my next layer here as I start to develop the fawn. Notice around the halo, around the legs there, where there's white between the brown of the fawn and the floral color. I'll take care of that in a little bit, but I didn't want any hard line edges. Okay, as we get close to the face, this is where the focal point of detail often is. I'm using a little gray for the ear inside there, just a tad. All right, there we go. All right, the neutral tint with the fawn color is what I use to dot inside the ears there. And now as I come down the animal's back, the back is the reddest part of that deer. And then as it goes down towards the lower limbs, it starts to go a little bit lighter. Now here's a case where if I didn't wait long enough for the underlayer to dry, I would get a bleed. And you're going to see that in the most critical part of this, which is the eye. But it'll all work out. Now that tone is blue. It's blue mixed with a little of that fawn color to give it a shadow effect. Okay? Because we'd still have to know about that form and what that form is doing in space and the lighting that hits it. So I'm talking here about the joint of the knee, you know, well, we call it the patella, down to the, that's the front leg folded back, the hoof there. And so you'll see as this develops on, it comes together. I didn't want to emphasize too much of the legs because he's laying in the grass and in the florals, and some of that floral material will cover him. And I'm allowing that red tone of the deer's flesh, his skin, to come through on that patch of flower there. So we're going to let that dry a little bit. And now I've got a fine tip here. And I didn't let it dry enough, I think. I got in there a little too quick, and right about here, oops, I made a little mess up on that mascara line right there. So I clean it up with a brush, and I just wipe the brush, rinse the brush, and quickly wipe the brush and rinse the brush. I keep rinsing and wiping until I've absorbed all of that extra paint that got out of line. So there's no need to panic. It's always fixable. And now I'm coming in for the nose. Now the eye is not complete, but we're going to get there. And I don't use black, I'm using neutral tint and cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and part of my red, which was the quinacridone, just a tad. You can use burnt sienna. If you want to use burnt umber, you can with the neutral tint. I prefer to mix my own dark colors so they're a little more lively. And now I'm just working in some of the details of the mouth. I'm going to come in for that reddish brown for the eye. And I'm coming in with some real nice detail there with a 1-point brush for the eyebrow and the nose, using a little gray. And then I'm going to run that gray up as my brush is a little drier. I'm working wet on a dry surface now. And I'll layer that bridge of the nose like that till it picks up that very natural look as it goes from that gray into the brown, going up the bridge of the nose to the forehead. So don't want to fuss too much with the feet because I don't want to overemphasize it, or the color. I want to sort of let it merge with the foliage. Okay, now I'm using about a size 10 watercolor brush, round, and going back in with that fawn color, but it's darker now. So I've used more of the blue and the burnt sienna and neutral tint to make a darker brown. What I'm doing now is sort of getting the eye to focus on that deer and not run off the edges of the paper. There's a tendency for the eye to wander unless it's guided to an area of focus. So I'm dropping in some of this forest feature. Now I've got a twig brush, which is very thin, long, bristled, round, and the tip is about, over an inch long, maybe about an inch. It's called a twig brush. Some people have special brushes called rigging brushes. Basically what I'm doing is dropping in some fine twig and grass structures. And a little foreground element. It's okay to cover the subject just a little bit. Give it a little that natural look. I deliberately wanted this painting to have a more delicate look. I didn't use any dark foreground elements for heavy framing. The whole thing is very delicate. I wanted to capture the energy of a newborn fawn. Something that was whimsical, delicate, sweet, so hence the lighter colors. Just a little bit more ambient for the subject. So now I'm dotting in some foliage. A little bit of the greenery using a fine tip, and making leaves on some of the foliage. Some of the florals have these leaf colors of green. You can always darken your green with a little more cobalt blue or neutral tint, or even burnt sienna, depending which way you're going in your color scale and your temperature scale. So, and now around the deer's back where that halo effect was going on, I'm dropping in a little bit of that floral color. Now for these little white flowers like baby's breath, I'm dotting them with a sort of a yellowy orange color, and I use Vermillion and Hansa yellow just to get a few dots in there. Not all the flowers will be facing the viewer, so I didn't have to dot all of them. Some of the florals will be halfway in the other direction or facing away. I just dotted a few. And now some small touches here and there to reinforce some of the work before, and it's dry now, so I'm painting wet on dry, deepening some of the tones of the coat. I'm going into some of the muscles. That's the scapula coming forward. That's a bone. It's of course covered by muscle. And some of the folds in the skin. I'm tucking that tail underneath. And dotting with some more flowers closer to the animal. Just looking here and there where some touch-ups might be helpful. And we're almost there. It's coming out pretty good. I put a little graying around the head there, around the ears, just to keep them from looking too stark white. And I think it's pretty much done. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Please let me know and leave your suggestions in comments, and come back again and join me. God bless you. Be safe and have fun painting. Be well. Bye for now.